should let him in on the joke by now. It's an actress by the name of Arlene Banner. She was talking backstage. They didn't tip you, did they?
No.
Good, I'm
In
glad.
fact, you know, it sounded to me...
For decades, Johnny Carson was seen as the calm, confident face of late-night television. Night after night, he made America laugh, controlled the room, and never seemed shaken. But long after the cameras stopped rolling and years after his death, questions have refused to fade. Now, more than 20 years after Johnny Carson's passing, those rumors are being revisited, and this time, they're not coming from outsiders or speculation. Join us as we break down what's being confirmed, why it matters now, and what it reveals about one of television's most powerful and private figures. The small-town illusion. Johnny Carson's story often starts with a clean, comforting picture. A boy from a tiny town who grew up the right way and went on to become famous. He was born in Corning, Iowa, on October 23, 1925. Corning was the kind of place where families knew each other. People kept routines, and kids were expected to behave. When Johnny was still young, his family moved to Nebraska. That move mattered. It took him out of one familiar community and dropped him into a new one, where he had to adjust, fit in, and learn how to handle change without showing too much emotion. At home, his parents were very different influences. His mother, Ruth Elizabeth Carson, ran the household and was deeply involved in family life. His father, Homer Lloyd Kit Carson, worked as a power company manager and brought a steady working man structure to the family. From the outside, this looked like a solid Midwestern setup. A hardworking dad, a busy mom, and a child with plenty of guidance. But solid doesn't always mean easy. Rules, expectations, and strong opinions can create pressure, especially for a child who's sensitive and wants approval. That's where Johnny's early interest in magic starts to feel less like a cute hobby and more like something he needed. Magic gave him a way to focus, practice, and control how people reacted to him. When you do a trick, you decide what others see and when they see it. For a kid living in a strict home, that kind of control can feel calming. It also gives you a clear goal: perform well, get applause, and avoid trouble. Johnny practiced constantly and performed for family members and friends at gatherings. These performances weren't just for fun. They were a way to earn attention in a safe, predictable way. If he made people laugh or amazed them, he could feel successful without having to argue or explain his feelings. Over time, being the entertaining one became part of who he was. One of the most complicated forces in Johnny Carson's life was his relationship with his mother, Ruth Elizabeth Carson. By many private accounts, she was not a gentle or passive presence. She was demanding, controlling, and deeply involved in her son's choices, thoughts, and behavior. Even as Johnny grew older, her influence did not fade. Instead of stepping back, she continued to insert herself into his life in ways that felt overwhelming and intrusive. From a young age, Johnny felt pressure to meet his mother's expectations. She had strong opinions about how he should behave, what he should value, and how he should present himself. This did not stop when he became an adult, went to college, or even after he became famous. According to people close to him, Ruth continued to speak to him as if he were still a child who needed correction. That constant oversight created tension and resentment that never fully went away. The most shocking moment came when Ruth Carson died and Johnny chose not to attend her funeral. For many, this decision was hard to understand. But for Johnny, it reflected unresolved rage and emotional detachment that he never worked through. It wasn't indifference. It was distance built from years of pain. And this strained bond didn't just shape his past, it quietly followed him into every relationship that came next. For Johnny Carson, magic wasn't just a fun interest he picked up as a kid. It became one of the first things in his life that truly clicked, and it helped shape the person the world later met on television. Around age 12, he found a book about magic that sparked a serious obsession. That moment mattered because it gave him a clear skill to build, step by step, in a way that felt safe and rewarding. By his early teens, Johnny wasn't only practicing in private. He began performing at local events, and he reportedly got paid for some shows. Those first paid performances were important because they taught him something powerful. If he could entertain people, he could win approval and attention without having to explain himself. The applause gave him confidence, but it also trained him to rely on performance as a way to connect. Later in life, this habit didn't disappear. Carson sometimes carried a deck of cards backstage and used small tricks to cope with panic or tension. It wasn't about showing off. It was a coping tool. The cards gave him something steady to do when his mind was racing, especially in high-pressure situations where everyone expected him to be perfect. And once you understand how he learned to hide anxiety so early, you're ready for the next chapter, where control starts showing up in riskier ways. Early rebellion and arrest. As Johnny Carson grew older, small signs of rebellion began to surface, quietly pushing against the clean image later attached to his name. As a teenager, filled with ambition and restlessness, he hitchhiked to Hollywood. This was not a casual trip. It was a bold move driven by curiosity, confidence, and a desire to escape limits placed on him back home. Hitchhiking alone, especially at that age, showed his willingness to take risks and trust his instincts, even when the outcome was uncertain. That same streak led to one of the earliest public cracks in his story, his arrest for impersonating a midshipman. While details were rarely discussed, the incident itself mattered. It showed Johnny testing boundaries and experimenting with identity. He wasn't just breaking a rule for fun, he was stepping into a role that gave him status and authority, even temporarily. Getting caught was embarrassing, but it didn't stop him from continuing to push limits in other ways. These brushes with authority gave him a rush. For someone who grew up in a strict home, rule-breaking offered a sense of freedom. It was a way to feel independent and in control without asking permission. That feeling didn't disappear with age. Instead, it evolved. While he later became highly disciplined in his career, impulsive behavior still appeared in his personal life, especially when it came to relationships, drinking, and emotional reactions. As an adult, these patterns showed up as quick decisions, sharp tempers, and moments of excess. He often acted first and dealt with consequences later. These traits were easier to hide once he became famous, surrounded by staff, lawyers, and publicists who could smooth things over. Early on, however, there was no safety net. The arrest and risky choices stood on their own as warnings of deeper habits forming. When Johnny Carson joined the U.S. Navy during World War II, it wasn't just a job or a detour. It was a major life shift that shaped how he handled pressure, rules, and people. Military life demanded structure. You followed orders, kept routines, and learned to function even when you were tired, stressed, or scared. For someone who already had a strong need to stay in control, this environment could feel both stabilizing and intense. During his service, Carson also took part in amateur boxing tournaments. Boxing is physical, but it's also mental. You learn to stay sharp, read your opponent, and push through discomfort. It can build confidence, but it can also feed aggression, especially if someone is already carrying anger underneath the surface. For Carson, boxing likely strengthened his ability to hide fear and keep his face calm even when he was under attack. But it also reinforced the idea that strength means not showing weakness. And after the war, when Carson returned to civilian life, he wasn't just coming back with experience. He was coming back with habits that would shape everything he did next. Reinvention. Through radio. After his time in the Navy, Johnny Carson came back with a clearer sense of what he wanted. An entertainment career that gave him both control and recognition. He returned to the University of Nebraska and began studying journalism. That choice made sense on paper. Journalism was practical, it involved writing and speaking, and it could lead to stable work. But Carson soon realized it didn't fully match what he was becoming. He switched to speech and drama, and that move was a big deal. It showed he was willing to leave the safe path and commit to performing. Radio became one of his earliest proving grounds. In radio, you don't have costumes, big sets, or fancy visuals. It's your voice, your timing, and how well you can hold attention. Carson learned how to sound confident even when he wasn't. He practiced speaking clearly, making jokes land, and keeping the energy up. Over time, the microphone became a place where he could feel in charge. The more he did it, the more natural it sounded, and that helped him build real on-air confidence. That confidence grew even more when he started hosting Who Do You Trust? This show helped train him in the most important skill he would later master: guiding a conversation. A host has to keep things moving, handle surprises, and stay calm when someone says something strange or unexpected. Carson learned how to make guests look good while still staying in control of the moment. He also learned the value of being quick without seeming rushed. Behind the scenes, Carson was studying more than jokes. He was learning timing. He paid attention to how long to pause before a punchline, how to let a guest finish without jumping in, and when silence could work better than extra words. He was also learning audience psychology, even if he didn't call it that. He could tell when people were leaning in, when they were bored, and when they wanted something sharper or lighter. This is the kind of skill you only get by doing it over and over in real time. This reinvention phase was important because it built the professional Carson the public would later trust. But it also quietly strengthened the habit of keeping emotions locked down. And once he reached the biggest stage of all, those hidden pressures started to show up in new ways. Taking over The Tonight Show. When Johnny Carson replaced Jack Paar as host of The Tonight Show in 1962, it was a huge jump. This wasn't just another TV job. Late-night television was becoming a nightly habit for many Americans, and the person behind that desk could shape what people talked about the next day. Carson walked into a role with a lot of attention on it, and he knew the audience could turn on him fast if he didn't deliver. At first, there was real pressure. Ratings mattered, and so did public opinion. Even though Carson had experience, he was stepping into a spotlight where every pause, every joke, and every interview would be judged. People forget that famous careers don't always start with instant comfort. Early on, Carson had to prove he belonged there. He was dealing with stress while also trying to look relaxed on camera, which became one of his strongest skills. What made Carson different was how he reshaped the show without making a big announcement about it. He didn't come in and flip everything overnight. He adjusted things slowly and carefully, so viewers accepted the changes without feeling like the show had been taken away from them. Over time, his version of The Tonight Show became the standard. A strong opening monologue, quick jokes that matched the news of the day, a clear rhythm to interviews, and a steady sense that the host was in charge. That desk mattered more than it looked. Carson used it like a control center. It gave him authority while still feeling friendly. From that position, he could guide a guest, interrupt when needed, or shift the mood with a single comment. He also became known for controlled spontaneity. The show felt loose and natural, but behind that casual feel was careful timing and strong instincts. He knew when to push, when to back off, and when to let the audience react. He could make a moment feel unplanned while still keeping it safe. As this style took hold, something else happened quietly. Carson became a gatekeeper. If a comedian, actor, or singer got on The Tonight Show, it could change their career overnight. A good appearance could lead to more bookings, better roles, and real fame. A bad appearance could hurt someone just as fast. Carson didn't always have to say yes or no directly. His choices did the talking. Who he invited, who he welcomed back, and who he kept at a distance sent clear signals through the industry. And once he reached that level of control, the next question became even bigger. What happened when people disappointed him or challenged his power? The dark side of control. To most viewers, Johnny Carson looked calm and in control. He could smile, make a sharp joke, and move smoothly from the monologue to the guest chair like it was easy. But many people who worked around him described a very different side that came out when the cameras weren't rolling. The contrast was part of what made his reputation so complicated. On air, he was friendly and confident. During commercial breaks, he could become short-tempered and harsh, sometimes over small problems like a missed cue. a joke that didn't land, or a technical mistake. Over the years, staff members and insiders reported mood swings. Some nights he could be relaxed and funny behind the scenes, and other nights he could be cold, irritated, or explosive. People learned to read the room quickly: how he walked in, how he spoke to the crew, and how he reacted to the first moments of the show. When someone has that much influence, even a look or a quick comment can change the mood for everyone. Alcohol is often mentioned as a major factor. Carson struggled with alcoholism, and it seemed to function as a coping mechanism for anxiety, pressure, and emotional strain. Drinking can dull nerves in the short term, but it usually makes mood issues worse over time. It can lower patience, increase anger, and make it harder to think clearly in stressful moments. For someone hosting a live or near-live show in front of millions, the pressure was constant. If he already carried anxiety and a need for control, alcohol may have felt like relief, even while it quietly made his behavior more unpredictable. A big driver underneath it all was fear of failure. Carson's job depended on being sharp every night. Late night isn't forgiving. If you seem tired, slow, or unprepared, the audience notices. That kind of pressure can make a person tense and defensive. When you feel like your status could slip, you may react strongly to anything that threatens your performance. Anger becomes a way to push back against fear. Instead of admitting stress, a person lashes out. Another reason these issues lasted is that power insulated him from consequences. Carson was the star, the brand, and the center of the show. When someone that important has a bad moment, the system around them often adapts instead of pushing back. Staff may stay quiet to protect their jobs. Networks may avoid conflict because the ratings are strong. Over time, this creates an environment where bad habits can grow. This side of Carson didn't erase his talent, but it shows what it cost him to maintain that perfect image. And as the pressure followed him home, the same need for control started damaging his closest relationships too. Marriage and affairs. Johnny Carson's private life often looked complicated, even to people who tried hard to stay loyal to him. He was married 4 times, and while each relationship started with hope, the same problems kept showing up again and again. The pattern wasn't just bad luck. It was usually a mix of emotional distance, insecurity, and a strong need to stay in control. Over time, those issues wore down the marriages, no matter how good things seemed on the surface. Carson could be charming and fun, but that doesn't always translate into being emotionally present at home. Many accounts describe him as guarded. He didn't easily share his fears or sadness, and he could shut down during conflict. When a person avoids emotional closeness, their partner often feels alone, even while still married. That loneliness can turn into resentment, and resentment can turn into fights, coldness, or people seeking comfort elsewhere. Infidelity was another major problem. Rumors and reports about Carson's cheating followed him for years, and his own insecurity likely played a role. That might seem surprising because he was famous, wealthy, and admired. But insecurity isn't always about what other people see. It's about what someone feels inside. If a person doubts their own worth, they might chase attention to feel better temporarily. At the same time, they may become jealous and controlling because they fear being left. That combination, seeking freedom for yourself while demanding loyalty from others, can poison a relationship. One of the biggest emotional blows came when Carson discovered that a wife had an affair. For someone already struggling with self-esteem and trust, that kind of betrayal can feel crushing. Instead of processing the pain in a healthy way, Carson reportedly spiraled further into drinking. Alcohol may have felt like an escape from humiliation and heartbreak, but it also made his mood swings and anger worse. When drinking increases, communication gets harder, and the marriage becomes even less stable. The emotional cost of these problems didn't land only on Carson. His spouses lived with the stress of his public image and his private behavior at the same time. Being married to someone famous can sound glamorous, but it can also be lonely. Long work hours, constant attention from strangers, and the pressure to protect the brand can make real honesty difficult. Some partners may feel they must stay quiet, smile in public, and manage pain in private. Over time, that can affect their mental health, confidence, and sense of safety. His children also paid a price. When a household is filled with tension, arguments, distance, or sudden anger, kids learn to stay on guard. They may avoid conflict, feel responsible for keeping peace, or struggle to trust others later in life. Even if a parent provides money and opportunity, emotional instability can leave deep marks. And when a father is famous, the child may feel extra pressure to stay quiet because family problems can become public gossip. Fame did not solve Carson's insecurities, it magnified them. The more successful he became, the more people expected perfection. The more attention he received, the more he had to protect the image of being confident and in control. That made it harder to admit weakness, seek help, or fully open up to the people closest to him. In the end, the spotlight didn't calm his inner doubts. It often made them louder. And the next chapter gets even heavier, because one personal tragedy forced him to face pain that fame couldn't hide. The son who left. One of the most painful events in Johnny Carson's life was the death of his son, and it is also one of the chapters he spoke about the least. His son, Richard Carson, died in 1991 in a car accident. The loss was sudden and devastating. For any parent, losing a child is overwhelming, but for Carson, it hit a person who already struggled with expressing emotions and asking for support. Instead of opening up, he went quiet. The emotional fallout was heavy, even if it was mostly hidden from the public. People close to Carson noticed changes. He became more withdrawn and more guarded than before. Grief didn't show up in public statements or emotional interviews. It stayed behind closed doors. Carson had spent his life learning how to perform through stress, and that same habit took over here. He continued working, maintained his routine, and avoided public displays of pain. This silence became especially noticeable because of a reported disagreement with Fred de Cordova, the longtime producer of The Tonight Show. After Richard's death, there was discussion about how, or whether, the show should acknowledge the loss. Accounts differ on what exactly happened, but it's clear there was tension. Carson reportedly did not want a public tribute that drew attention to his personal grief. For him, the idea of turning such a private loss into a televised moment felt wrong. The disagreement strained a relationship that had already seen years of pressure. Carson's inability to publicly process grief wasn't new, but this moment made it clearer than ever. He did not talk openly about his son's death on air. He didn't use the show as a space to reflect or heal. Viewers who watched him night after night would have had no idea he was carrying that level of pain. This wasn't because he didn't care. It was because showing that pain went against everything he had learned about survival and control. This loss remains one of the least openly discussed parts of his life, because Carson himself kept it that way. He didn't want sympathy, explanations, or public mourning. He chose silence, even if that silence carried a heavy cost. For someone who spoke to millions every night, this was the moment when words completely failed him. And as the years went on, that silence only deepened, shaping how he handled the conflicts and betrayals that followed. Joan Rivers. Few relationships in late-night television history ended as painfully as the one between Johnny Carson and Joan Rivers. For years, Rivers was more than just a guest on The Tonight Show. She was a protégé. Carson gave her frequent appearances at a time when female comedians rarely received that kind of platform. He trusted her talent, admired her sharp humor, and even allowed her to guest host the show when he was away. That role signaled something important. He saw her as family, or at least as someone inside his inner circle. That closeness made what came next feel personal. In the mid-1980s, Rivers was offered her own late-night talk show on a competing network. For her, it was a major career opportunity. Hosting her own show meant independence, control, and recognition beyond being someone else's substitute. She accepted the deal, but she did so without first telling Carson. That decision changed everything. Carson felt deeply betrayed. From his perspective, Rivers didn't just take another job, she crossed a line. He believed loyalty mattered, especially from someone he had helped elevate. The lack of a direct conversation hurt him as much as the competition itself. To Carson, it felt like a personal rejection, wrapped inside a professional move. His reaction was swift and final. Rivers was permanently banned from The Tonight Show. Carson refused to speak to her or allow her back on the program. But the consequences went far beyond one show. At the time, Carson held enormous influence in television. Networks, producers, and booking agents paid close attention to who he supported and who he avoided. After the fallout, Rivers found doors closing. Invitations slowed. Opportunities disappeared. While she continued working and remained a public figure, her career path became much harder than it had been before. Years later, Rivers spoke openly about the pain the split caused her. She acknowledged Carson's role in launching her career and expressed sadness that they never repaired their relationship. Even though they briefly reconnected shortly before his death, the damage lingered. There was no real closure, only a sense of loss and unresolved hurt. Fame as isolation. As Johnny Carson got older, one of the clearest changes in his life was how strongly he protected his privacy. Early in his career, he had to be seen, booked, interviewed, and photographed. But later on, especially after he became the undisputed face of late-night TV, he seemed to want the opposite. He didn't just prefer quiet, he built his life around it. He avoided talking about his personal life in interviews, kept details out of the press, and treated private matters like they were off-limits, even to people who thought they knew him well. After retirement in 1992, his withdrawal became more obvious. He stepped away from Hollywood social circles and stopped showing up at many public events. While other stars stayed visible through appearances and projects, Carson became harder to find. He spent more time in private homes and controlled spaces where he didn't have to perform. This wasn't just a simple choice to relax. It was part of a long pattern. He wanted distance, and he wanted control over who had access to him. Johnny Carson died on January 23, 2005, at the age of 79, after a long battle with emphysema, a disease linked to years of heavy smoking. He died at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles, surrounded by very limited public attention, exactly the way he had chosen to live his later years. News of his death sparked widespread tributes from entertainers, politicians, and fans, all acknowledging the massive role he played in shaping late-night television. Even as much of his personal life and inner struggles remained largely unspoken. If you enjoyed this video, let us know what surprised you most in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more untold stories just like this.